your R6 needs a valve adjustment? Well, finally I have enough time to spend an in-depth video on how to do a valve adjustment and the telltale signs of when you need one. The 08 and up R6s generally do not need valve adjustments as common as the 06 and 07s. I had a 2006 R6 and it literally needed a valve adjustment every 5,000 to 6,000 miles. It was bad, and that's why I sold it. I don't know if the 07 does as well, but I think the 07 and 06s had some issues with that. This is a 2008 and I've got right around, I think, 34,000 miles, and I need to check the air filter. I need to do an oil change. I need to grease some of the cables and connections, and I am quite confident I need to do a valve adjustment. It's running a little bit rough. It's another telltale sign is if you have any sort of exhaust, it will backfire in general frequently as compared to when it doesn't need a valve adjustment. When it's idling and when you first start it, overall, it's just smoother and cleaner when you don't need a valve adjustment. When you do need a valve adjustment, it lopes and it's rough and it's gritty. And when your valves are in spec, everything just runs smoother. You don't really gain a ton of power by doing a valve adjustment. It's more a process of maintenance rather than anything else. Normally you don't have to do this, but I have a steering stabilizer. It really helps to do this with an almost empty tank, which I did before this. Bit of a lesson, don't do this when the bike is hot. Dripping out fuel, things are still very hot. I love how simple these things are. I've learned my lesson. If you get these too tight, they're super hard to get out and they strip. Like that one is stripping. Those I could have never gotten out with a regular screwdriver, so it helps to have an impactor. Just use the hammer setting and it comes off. But for the time being, I'm just going to set it over here to the side while I get to everything else. It's amazing how large these throttle bodies are. Anyway. Ooh. Yeah, that filter is actually pretty darn dirty. Then there's all these bolts in here, which you really have to have an extension. One of those kind of specialty tools that you don't know that you need until you run into it. Little servo just presses that in. Love this bike. Alright, there's this vent hose down here. Just gonna pull up and off. And this connection, I believe, yeah, it's a little bit easier to take out down here. Pop that out. And then there's this hose down here, which you can't forget about. Oh man, I love this bike. Gently pop that up. And then this guy, there's two tabs right here. Pop up. It's a little tricky trying to push this out. Gonna leave this where I found it. I won't cover this in detail, but I'll just make a quick note. If you have one of these types of filters, you don't have to have like K&N cleaning spray to get this clean, although it does help and it helps break down the grease and everything. You can just use hot soapy water to get this out. It just might take you a little bit longer. All right, next up, we're gonna disconnect some of this stuff in here. So there's a clip. You gotta kind of pull up on both sides. Kind of pull up on this tab and pull up on that tab. And I know in my older R6, these rubber hoses were starting to smear and get pretty old. So if yours are doing that, it might be time to replace some of these. This plug reach down in here, wiggle this up and out. I don't want to damage that rubber, but sometimes it helps to reach down here with your needle nose and just like grab it and twist it a little to break and free it up a little bit. That one came off pretty easily. Oh, there's one more. This clip goes to something down here. Okay. So I'll leave that on there right there. There's another one. Okay, now we're gonna do a bit of a tricky one. These brackets under here, which are a little hard to reach, but we'll manage. So I don't know, you can see, hopefully you can see the two over there. These are a bit difficult to get to. Gonna make sure you've got all four of those loose. There's also several connections here, so don't just start pulling this off. All right, so we got this guy. Now those two connections are still connected, which I believe are 10 mil, but you can just like wiggle forward. I'll pop loose like that. I'm gonna wiggle this, just making sure I'm not missing any connections. I know I've got this still connected, but these two things can come off together. Now this is a little bit tricky getting out with those throttle cables. So take your time on this. You kind of have to push this down and forward, and this kind of comes up like so. And then you can get access to these two, which are 10 mils. If you forget which one goes where, usually the bottom one is black. The bottom, just to be safe, so you don't forget. Once this is loose enough, you just pull off like that. And this will come out right there. Same on the bottom. So to make this easier, just twist the throttle this way. I didn't catch this good in the GoPro, so real quick, lighter colored one is pretty easy to take off at the top, but the black one on the bottom is very difficult to get to because it's way back there. But all you have to do is twist this and it goes to the bottom, so you can have a lot better access. Just wanted to throw that in there. And good to go. Oh, okay. This guy. Alrighty then. Now, when you're at this point, you can see there's dirt and stuff all around here, so I'm going to very carefully get a bit of this. You can see where all this dirt is. I'm just going to push down and out. Just go around, push down and out. Kind of. Now, unfortunately, you do have to take off the front upper radiator bolts. This is to lean it forward enough to get the valve cover on and off. Got this plastic plate I don't really want getting caught, so I'm just gonna push it up. Just to be safe, I'm gonna take off that bottom bolt, just a 10 mil. And I don't want to torque anything down here or bend it to the side. And yeah, just overall a lot more flexibility and wiggle room now. So I'm just gonna pull these out away. Get that out of the way. Pull this heat cover outside as well. And yeah, you have pretty good access to everything in here. A lot of little plugs in here that subject to be missed, so just keep that in mind. It's good to take pictures. Yeah, I want to say that's pretty much it. You may have to, I can't remember, I think some of these wires off to the side may give you some grief. So if you need to unplug them or move them, feel free to. 17 millimeter for the oil. Take a clean magnet and just chuck it in there. All right, we got to take off the shifter next. That was one of the... Okay, time to go in. Well, I got that lubricated. This oil looks actually really good. While I've got the glove on, I'm gonna go through here with this magnet. Okay. Another great time to do on your oil change is to grease this. To grease this guy, to grease this guy, and to grease this. And your kickstand if you want. I also do it. Here, you pop up these two tubes. Push down, then up. Shimmy this out. There's a wire that goes through here too, right there. Sometimes you gotta play with that. Also recommend spraying off your headers with some brake cleaner after you're done with all this. Just like Toyota, I love this. Every company should do this. They come pre-greased and sealed, not just exposed and in a cardboard box. All right, popped off these 3 screws. One are here, here, one on the bottom. And I get a good look at my sprocket. And I forgot about this, but if you clean and lube your chain, you'll get a lot of stuff caked in here, which I totally forgot about. But this section just slides out now that I have that other part off. So it makes it kind of easy to clean. And there's probably like a pound worth of grease and dirt and grime stuck in here. You can feel this thing is heavy. Put back in the drain plug, oil filters on, and fill this with about 3 quarts of oil. The reason why I'm going ahead and filling it up with oil, even though I still have to do the valve adjustment, is you're going to be turning the engine several times over, potentially a lot of times, just depending on how well things go. And, you know, technically when you're turning the engine, you're moving the oil pump, and it makes me feel better knowing that it has oil to pump when you're doing that. Just to double check. Do I have the drain plug in? Yes. Do I have the oil filter on? Yes. I think that because there was a time I was changing the oil on a BMW and I was in a conversation with my friend and I forgot to put back in the drain plug and the oil filter. And I proceeded to dump 4 quarts of oil back into the drain pan. Thankfully, the drain pan was still there, but I ended up wasting 30 bucks of good oil. So never doing that again. Just double checking, 10W40 motorcycle. What I like to do is on the 3rd bottle, I'll do about like half to 3/4 of it. When you do the oil filter, some of it will drain into the oil filter and fill that. Normally it uses like 2.8 to 3 quarts if I remember correctly, but you don't want to just pour in 3 quarts and hope that you didn't, fill too much. Give it some time to settle and get to the bottom of the engine, and then check the oil. If it's at the top of the dipstick or a little bit over, that's okay, because some of that will be, put into the oil filter and the rest of the system. All right, got the 4 coils out. They're sitting right here. And almost ready to start taking out that stuff, but I'm gonna loosen this guy, which sometimes, if you've worked on this like I have, you have to use more than one tool to If I remember correctly, I ended up having to take this off to make 100% sure that the outer mark lines up with top dead center to the top cams. Now, you can check the valves with just taking off this cover, because all you really need to do is you can see the two cams. Like, I know it's already at, like all the timing and everything is fine because it's been running fine. So I get it to top dead center, do all my, and I don't have to take off this cover. But if you do have to take out your cams, which I'm pretty sure I will, I'm gonna have to take this off. Got all the bolts out. Gently. That's all it needs, a little bit of persuasion. This is kind of a pain to work up and around. So yeah, kind of came out like that. Yeah, I broke the gasket. That's good. But this gasket has come out a couple times. It's getting pretty old. I'll probably go ahead and replace it. Cams look pretty good. Probably better to just replace this. When I have the cams off, I'll clean up some of that gasket area on these sides and everything. Nope, 12. Okay, I believe the eye is top dead center. Yeah. And you can tell, yeah, the first cylinders are up like that, so you can take their measurement right now. It doesn't really matter if you go from the front or the back or the sides. All right, now the fun begins. First one's exhaust should be between 0.16 and 0.23. It always will be tighter than that if it's out of spec. And I've never seen one that's looser than that, but I guess that's a possibility. So assuming the exhaust is tight, which I'm quite confident it's out of spec, I'm gonna start with a 0.13. All right, so that goes in with a light push. So it's gonna be close to that. Probably nothing crazy off. Not as bad as I was thinking. That fits pretty well. I'm gonna go a little bit more. Oh, that goes pretty smooth actually. Just light pressure as you're pulling out. Kind of like if your finger, if you just grab this with your finger, applying medium pressure, medium to light pressure, you want it to have that amount. It has oil on it, so even medium to light pressure means that it's close to that spec. So this one, it's just I lightly push in, pops in. It's got some rub to it. That one, it's a little bit looser. I'm gonna say this one's probably 0.12 and that one's probably 0.13. So existing is 0.13 and 0.12. So that's a decent amount out of spec. Nothing crazy, which I'm very happy to see. Although this is just the first round. Always double check. You just will not hate yourself for doing that. Seems a bit tight. That's too tight. That's too tight, yeah. Right around 0.13. I'm gonna change this so That one felt like 1, 5, and 4. It's a decent amount of pressure trying to push that in. I'm going to go with 0.12 on both of them. Just to be safe, I'll check it one more time with... Yeah, it's a little smooth. Okay, it's a tedious process. It takes some getting used to. Like I said, it's just if you light pressure on your finger and then pull back and forth, that's about how much pressure you want. So going over to the next stage, you can kind of just look at the valves turning right about when the cams face like outwards. You see how they're facing up and out. So I could probably go ahead and measure this and it's not going to affect anything. With exhaust, a little tight. Check the intake. Anyway, so I don't think I'm going to record all of this just to save you guys, but yeah, going through and recording this. Again, I haven't messed with anything, so now's your time. Turn it around as much as you want. Make sure and do it clockwise, facing this way. The next rotation, I believe these will be at their opposite ends, kind of like this. So I'll measure the far side, then the last one is going to be this guy. Going over this a bit, came out. So pretty much all of the intake side is out of spec, just a little bit. The exhaust is definitely all out of spec. The exhaust goes out sooner rather than later, and the intake is just slower to need adjustment. So what happens is even on this one right here that's at 0.12, it's at the edge, and over time it's just going to keep growing tighter and tighter. So what I'll do is I'll try and swap the shim, whatever it is in there, to maintain around 0.17 to 0.19 to get it, towards the top of that. And same with the rest of these, I'll try and get it like towards this upper between 0.17 and 1.9. I'll just have to go through, once I have the cams off, I'll have to see what's underneath the buckets. And each of those little shims have like a 0.185 or 0.175. I'll document each of those. Once I'm done with that, I can see, hey, I'm at 0.15 millimeters of tolerance when I should be at 0.16 to 0.23. So I'm going to change that shim to be thinner to get into that level to have more gap and tolerance. Another thing to quickly check is just make sure that this is nice and tight. If this is loose, you definitely want to inspect your cam chain tensioner. A couple of these are different sizes, so just be aware of that. Also, if that sticks in there, I'm going to push that back into the other side. One thing I forgot to mention, it's easier to turn things over with the spark plugs out. That way you're not having any sort of compression. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove those real quick. T, it's at that mark. Line is right here. Hard to see, but exhaust right flush is there as well with the cam chain tensioner tight. If it's not tight, it'll be a little bit further because this is like looser. Anyway, that's exactly how you want it when everything goes back together. The easy part is getting all this out. The hard part is getting back in and setting the timing right. Over time, this will actually drip multiple times, just a heads up. Cam chain tensioner. You'll want to go at this. Actually, the last time I did this, I didn't get the cam chain tensioner tight enough, and it over time got loose and then started leaking oil everywhere. So just make sure you go back and torque everything. So press that down. Then this one will be a lot easier to just undo by hand. I bought a replacement cam chain tensioner. This one hasn't given me any issues. If yours is an 06 or 07, this will stick out further. On my 06, on cold starts, like every third start, this would rattle because the cam chain tensioner was just not the best. I replaced it with an 08, which is a different part number, and it fixed it. I'd recommend doing the same if you're having that same issue on your bike. Ooh. Definitely do not want dirt in there. Over to here, this is hard, very hard. And you just push in. Ooh. That is very stiff. That locks it in place. So you insert it like this. You insert it like this. And then, like I said, sometimes you can like just turn it and it will pop open. This will drop down and it'll pop. And you got to make sure your timing doesn't jump when that happens. Or you can turn the cam the opposite way. It'll pull this and press on it. There's a couple different ways. I'll just have to see. I can't remember what was the best way last time I did this. Here's how we're going to do this. We're going to just do the exhaust, the intake one first. So opposite, about a quarter turn just to where it's slightly loose. Opposite, quarter turn to where it's loose. Quarter turn. Once it starts to get loose, you can go a little bit more than just a quarter turn. Got them all loose. These all have a direction. I'm going to lay them the same format that they're coming off. Take off both cams to actually get the chain loose enough. I found this saves a ton of time with this tedious process. This one's in a bind right now, which isn't good. Yeah, you want to try and avoid that. I think I tensioned it or loosened it a little bit incorrectly. You don't want to jerk things like that much. Well, I think it's fine. Don't drop this. Another thing, you don't want this to fall down there. Top dead center. This lines up. And the eye, the other one. Clean. Buckets. Try and use a clean magnet for this. You don't want to scuff up any of the surfaces. So just get that magnet. Sometimes it'll pull the shim up with it. So be careful of that. Put it down. And I can just reach in there, pop that shim out, just like that. So, go through and read these. Okay, I already had those shim sizes written down on here, so I'm just gonna copy that over. So just as a reference, it's like, what is the replacement shim to get me in this area, given that I have 1.15, or sorry, 0.15, it's gonna be 0.01, so I could go anywhere from 1.84 to, I've got 4, 5, 6, 7, so minus 177, and that should get me within this range. Now, what I found is if you don't have a 175, or sorry, if you don't have a 177 or a 17 or like a 180, if you go a smaller, so if you go to 175, generally it still falls in the top of this range. So this one, I'll probably put a 175 in here when I put this back in, and I'll still be on this in that range. And same goes for the rest of these. So hopefully that makes sense. Basically, you're just putting in a thinner shim to get within this range. This is tight. I need to get it looser again. To make it looser, I put in a thinner shim. So instead of a 185, if I put in a 180, that would probably get it within the range, but I'll probably do a 175 or a 177 if I have it, which I don't think I have. And once I do the numbers on all of these, I only have a certain amount of shims. So there's one that I might be like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and shave this down, or use the next size up or down, just given on how many shims I use. So I'm going to go through the math and then get back. Done with the final numbers. And before I go into this, one thing I wanted to point out is just, for example, on the previous one I did, you know, it had a 0.12 of tolerance, and then I had a 199 shim in here, and I switched it to a 195, which is 4 difference between the two. But this is the result. It's not 4, it's 2. So you have to think, I guess what's going on here is like when you're checking this, it's under compression and load, and it's like pushing down things slightly. So this is going to change. So basically, if you have an opportunity to go a little bit thinner shim, normally it still gets you in the green. So if you're like running out of shims, if you go a little bit tighter than you think, or a little bit thinner than you think, usually you'll still get within the range. Notice I did somewhat conservatively on these, and I was nowhere close to being 0.23 on any of these. So I would always shoot for example, on this one, 184 to 177. If I put a 175 in here, it's going to be fine. Like, I guarantee you it's not going to be in the 0.23. In worst case, if it is, you can take it apart again and revise it. What I have done before is not done this, and then I was still super close. I'm like, you know what? I might as well take it apart again to get it a little bit higher. That way I'm not having to do this next year rather than in 2 years, you know? So starting out, I'm just going to go through these. This is, you know, I have a certain amount of shims, and I think I stocked up on some of the ones I knew I was going to need, such as the 175, which for sure, of course, looking at it, I'll do 175 here, 175 here, probably not 175 there, probably 180, 180, probably 180, 180, 170 probably, and maybe 175. So I have a given amount of shims. I'm just going to go through. Same with the intake. Pretty self-explanatory. Again, this is why you shouldn't rush this. If you get in and you're like, you know what, I just don't have the shims, or you just want to order them after the fact, it's better to just, you know, plan to do this in a week or two. That way you can order a gasket that breaks or looks kind of crummy, or a part that you need, or the shims that you need. That's why I never would advise to do a valve adjustment and try and do it in like 2 days, because normally you have to order parts for it, and it's just better to be patient. One thing that's great about Yamaha is they tend to predict that the exhaust valves and the intake valves will wear a certain way. So guess what? I only have one 1.9 shim for my intake sides, because I'm going to need several 1.9 shims or 190 shims for these. But guess what? I'm going to be pulling out the 190s on the exhaust side. It seems like Yamaha is predicting that, and I think most companies do that. That way some of the ones you pull out on your exhaust can actually go right back in your intake. So before you get through all this, go ahead and, like, now that you have everything written down and you know what was in there, you can go ahead and put your shims on the table all back in your parts here. some of which the OEM ones are actually between these 5s. So you can actually have like a 1.78 in one of your OEM shims. So I'm going to go ahead and put back in all my shims, or at least the ones that are closest to here. And then I'll go back around and, do this. Alrighty, I am done. So you can see I could have gone between a 184 and a 177. I dropped that down to a 175, and you'll get to see as I do this, as I put the shims in, what does it actually measure out to once everything is in and torqued down. Like I've said before, it just from my own experience, I've never, I put one in that's thinner and I'm still nowhere close to that higher mark. So I'm not worried about it, but you'll get to see firsthand what the results are after I'm done with this. These two, wish I had something, I wish I had 2 more 190s, but I'm really not worried about this. This is the intake side, and the exhaust is going to wear out long before the intake side does, so I'm not too worried. And they were barely out of spec anyway. This one was still in spec, so going from a 195 to a 192 is just still going to help this. Same with this one. It's going from a 199 to 192. Just fair warning, if these have sat for a while, I'm seeing a little bit of rust on just a couple of them. So I'm going to get some really fine grit sandpaper, put a little bit of oil, and just smooth out if they have any imperfections on these with a micrometer. I've checked the measurements on these hot cams. They're spot on every single time, so I'm not checking them again because I trust them. But yeah, I'm going to clean these up, and then I'm going to stick in each of these shims into the little slots right there. They just slide right in. Make sure that when you pop in the shims that they're actually even. Sometimes they go in at a crooked angle and you have to push them in or pop them in. Don't force them. You should just be able to very gently pop them in with your finger. Make sure they're flush and even though. You don't have to put these necessarily in the same order. I just, out of habit, just put them back in with their same cylinder. Just have a very gentle touch when you're doing this, and they'll just slide right in once they find their niche. All right, I'm gonna try and get to the timing tonight. I just went through half the video and I realized that my camera angle is pointing too far up, so it's all the important stuff is slightly cut off, but so this is going to be a tricky process. T, top dead center, there's a mark right here, and then on the cams there's the I and E that face out. That needs to line up as well. Looking for the E right here. Gonna kind of roll this in, even though I know the timing is off. Like so. So thankfully the top side is kind of looped, draped down. So I've got to go. Probably best to pull up and then that looks close. It sometimes helps to mark where the chain exactly was. That way you're not guessing on this. But I forgot to do that this time. Somewhat. Which I might have just screwed up. I can go ahead and pull out that guy. A little bit off. Another thing that I remember happening is when you're torquing this down and put in the cam chain tensioner, because while you're torquing, it's gonna start pulling on one of these really hard. And then I think one time it because I didn't have it in, it popped a tooth and I had to take everything out again. Yeah, when I start torquing things down, I'll put it in. So I got the new cam chain tensioner in. I have a new gasket, but like I've said before, these like metal ones, as long as they're not damaged when you pull them off, you can generally reuse, which I'm going to attempt. In worst case, if this leaks, then I can take it off and put on the new gasket. I think this is the lineup. I'm gonna give this a last pull. If this was loose, you want this back all the way down to the gear to be tight, and them to be somewhat even, if not slightly this way. Like this is picking up a little bit, but that's okay. I think once I torque everything down and this pops out, that will fix itself. So back on with what I may end up having to do is turn this a little bit. Start torquing this end. I'm just gently going. Normally you want to go inside to out, but it's like the cams in this state. You could try like rotating things to get a lobe off to where it's easier to like get the things actually threaded. But in my current state, very slowly back down. Going from inside to out. I got everything like bottomed out, got it lightly snugged. I'm not gonna torque everything, but now's the time where I should be able to hopefully pop out the cam chain tension. All right. So I'm actually gonna try and go slightly back. Maybe I did pop it out. Normally you can hear it. Well, sorry guys. I could have sworn that whenever you do this, you would hear it pop out and see it kind of build tension. I'm 80% sure that it's popped out, and I have that hunch because whenever I go a little bit back, it seems like there's definitely something that's actually pushing on the guide. And I can't budge it, you know? So, fairly confident it's popped out. If it is popped out, as soon as you start popping it out, it starts popping into these rivets, and then you can't push it back in. So you kind of have to do the process over again, which normally doesn't entail you having to take out the cams, but yeah. So again, I've had this, I think what happened was valve adjustment. I got my timing right, but I didn't have this extended. And then the first time I started, it jumped a tooth on the intake, and then I had to take everything apart again. But worst case, I'll feel it with the power drop, and I'll have to do this, you know, just take out the cams again, which I don't think that's going to happen. I just remember that happening before. As soon as I pressed in, it dropped, didn't hear anything, and then now that I'm turning, everything's tight. Well, I'm going to assume that's the case. It seems like it's taut. Everything, the timing is good. Just one last verification. I, very flush right there. And then E, very flush right there. And then just to double verify, you can see my camos on the exhaust at the very end, facing up. And then on the intake, also facing up. So, and that's in conjunction with T being on this line right here. You can see that. So, well, that went decently well. I got this snugged and torqued. I don't have the top of the cams torqued. Just to keep stuff from getting in here, I'll probably clean this up, wipe up the oil, make sure there's no cracks or anything, reinstall this. I've reused this gasket like 3 or 4 times in the past, and it's always held. So Hopefully yours is the same. If it's older and like a portion of it obviously breaks off, then yeah, you're gonna have to address it. This does look wet around here, so I wonder if there is a leak. You know what I forgot to do, though it's a little late now, is clean up these while the cams were out. I meant to do that. While you have the cams out, it's easier to clean up the gasket sealing surface for the valve cover gasket, which I forgot to do. All right, didn't get a chance to record this, but same process. Before you put the valve cover on, rotate, check your tolerances, and then, you know, move forward from there. So right now, pulled this wiring back. I got the valve cover on, got those snug down. Getting these spark plugs. I got the spark plugs they had a little bit high gap just because they're, you know, they've got some mileage on them. So I re-gapped the spark plugs, and I'm just kind of going and backtracking the way I came. These the coil packs, you really have to push down hard when you're getting them installed. Make sure this is actually on.
No children in the streets, where do they play? Freedom here has been revoked, the ground which all their fathers soaked. No medicine, the scarcity of nourishment is evident. God, have we seen that side of heaven yet? No. Rich, poor, clutching to their sheets and horror. Is there an answer? 'Cause there's nobody who can take away all our present dismay. Bury the light, praise through night. Mayhem in the streets, no order. Is there an answer? 'Cause there's nobody who can take away all our present dismay.
I'm gonna check through several things, sit here for a while and just think about everything I did, make sure I'm not forgetting anything. I won't bore you with putting back on all the fairings, but if this is your first time, I would run it a bit longer, maybe even take it up and down the street just a little bit before putting everything back on, just in case something does go awry. But yeah, I'm gonna put all the fairings back on, take it for a spin, see how it feels.